Hey, what's up? Why are there no Elric of Melnibone, Michael Moorcock, or any of the Eternal Champion video games out there? Because with video games, they've got every single every single title, every single character that's ever been created in movies, comic books, TV shows, novels. They have video games for it. Like there are video games for the most obscure stuff. They have the Smurfs video game, and the Smurfs was a pretty popular, but still, it was a cartoon on Saturdays in the 80s, basically, right? They stopped making Smurfs after that. They have like video games, they have Barbie video games. It's just a popular doll, right? And they've got a lot of other fantasy character video games of shows and characters that like were popular, but not like that popular, right? The Hulk. A lot of people know the Hulk, and there was a TV show about the Hulk, right? But it's not like the most popular thing ever. It's not Harry Potter. Game of Thrones, for example, there's Harry Potter video games. Harry Potter has a bunch of video games, right? Game of Thrones, I don't know if there's video games for Game of Thrones. I have never really saw a video game for Game of Thrones, but there might be out there. There's video games out there with everything. Even if you go back, even like past the like seventh generation, if you go all the way back to like the SNES, the NES, all those things, like back in the day, they would make a video game out of anything that came out. Star Wars right away, as soon as even on the Atari 2600, they had video games with Star Wars. Tron, for example. Tron had an arcade game that was pretty good at the time, right? And Tron was just a good movie, and Tron had a cult following. Tron wasn't like the most popular movie ever. Like if you asked like the average person, even the average person that likes sci-fi or fantasy, if they saw Star Wars, they'd say yes. If they saw Tron, some people would say, yeah, I did, and some people I didn't. But that was a video game, right? Even Dune had a bunch of video games that came out. Xena Warrior Princess. Hercules Legendary Journeys. Clash of the Titans has a video game on the Xbox 360. Right? I do believe it's on the Xbox 360. But Elric, even though Elric has other things, not exactly a bunch of novels. In fact, Michael Moorcock, the author of the Elric Saga and all of the Eternal Champion books, has been making his content, is making Elric content all the way back. I do believe it was like the late 60s is when he started it, and he's still making Elric books to this day. He's even though he killed off the character in one of the books, right? It doesn't matter because Elric is this eternal champion figure where he's always alive somewhere in some timeline, in some dimension, somehow. He just crosses dimensions. He walks over these rainbow bridges or whatever it is, right? And he's not the only character that's like him, right? There's the other eternal champions. There's Ericos, there's Corum, there's Hawkmoon. There's all of these other characters that are like Elric. They're also aspects of the Eternal Champion, the same character, the same person that Elric is, except they're different. They're not like this albino, white-haired emperor of this Melnibone place that's descended from dragons and has these ruby red eyes and like a soul-sucking sword called Stormbringer. Even though in Game of Thrones they threw in a sword named Stormbringer. When they asked, it was one of the episodes. I didn't see a lot of Game of Thrones. I'm reading the books now. Well, the first book. And it's very, very well written, but I'm just looking at it like, well, the thing about that book is that like it hasn't gotten to any fantasy content yet. It's more of a just like the series was, it was a medieval drama, right? More or less than that. And it only became fantasy during when that woman who became the mother of dragons, and then there were these monsters, these orcs or whatever, these monsters that started like invading and stuff like that. So they do talk about monsters a little bit, but there's no actual fantasy. There's no magic. There's no monsters. No dragons. There's no like, there's some larger than life characters and situations, but not really fantasy. It's more of a medieval drama at this point. I do see it getting into a fantasy, At some point, I don't know if George R. R. Martin wanted to be a fantasy at some point, but I guess, I mean, it is labeled as fantasy, and it is in the fantasy section of the bookshop and stuff like that. So I'm reading that, but I don't know if there was ever like a TV. I mean, there's a TV show, like a super popular TV show. I don't know if there was ever a video game, because they've done video games about the most random stuff. Like every single like almost every single superhero character has a video game. Punisher has video games. You know, like there's so many of those. Like the Transformers have video games. You know, some things don't. Like for example, Battle of the Planets. I don't know if there's a video game for that, but there could be. There might be some in Japan, since they kind of like, you know, were involved with that at some point. Even though I think originally was an American cartoon, and so that's the thing about Michael Moorcock's work. It's never really become a movie. It's never really become, unless except for there was one movie that he did like a really really long time ago, but it was not very very popular and whatever. It's like the only movie he did, and I think maybe that's one of the reasons why he never got a second movie, because he did this one movie. The thing about that movie that came out, it was not about any of his fantasy characters. It wasn't about his main best characters. You know, it wasn't about Elric. It wasn't about, and you know, the Eternal Champions or Hawk Moon or any of those characters. It was about like one of his other Cornelius Chronicles or something like that. One of those other books, which I have. I've got the entire Cornelius Chronicles. I was trying to read it a little bit, just couldn't get into it. It's not a fantasy book. It's and I really don't know what it gets into, but I thought it was somewhat fantasy, but it really wasn't at the point where I was reading it. Maybe later it gets into it, but it's not really, I don't know, it's not really a fantasy. It's not really medieval. There's no swords, there's no dragons, there's no like magic in it, as far as I could tell, but whatever. But they did make a little bit of a movie all the way back in the day. It's so like unpopular, like no one's ever heard of it. Unless you dig around and try to find his only movie, like you'll find it somewhere on some archive, on some computer platform, you know, like website somewhere. It exists, but I heard it wasn't very, very good. I have no plans of watching it, because it's not the thing I'm into with him, right? So, but the thing is, like, they've done comic books and American comic books. And I was thinking, like, one of the reasons why he doesn't have a movie is because because like Hollywood's an American kind of like organization, and Hollywood basically recognizes like American writers, American artists and things like that. Maybe because he's British, because he's English, he's never really gotten Hollywood, which is American, to do it, to recognize him and make a movie about like any of his work. But the thing is that, like, if you look at it, like, American movie producers have made movies with British artists a lot. You know, for example, Alan Moore, who did The Watchmen, which was like way less popular, even though it was a great comic, and I think it became a very, very popular comic just because it was very good. But it was literally a 12-issue comic. It was 12 issues. It came out monthly, and at the end of the year, it was from beginning to end of the story of The Watchmen. He didn't want like anyone to make a movie out of it, but they did it anyway. Somehow they got the rights to do it, which they shouldn't have, but they went ahead and made a movie out of it, and it wasn't necessarily as big as Moorcock's work, you know. And and he is British and he is English, right? And but the thing is, I was looking at like the story of The Watchmen. Watchmen is an American story. It's about America during the Cold War as an alternate history of what happened at that time. It was in the 80s, and it had Richard Nixon in it. It had Vietnam and that going on. It took place in America. So for some reason, Alan Moore made an American comic book, which is interesting because I didn't know he knew a lot about America. He's very, very British. And he doesn't live in like a central area in Britain. He lives like in a country area, sort of like an off area, which he calls the center of the world. But in Britain, it's not like your most popular area in Britain. But that might be one of the reasons why an American producer or American companies wanted to make that. because it was about America. It was during the Cold War. It had superheroes, and at the time, even now or whatever, like superheroes has always been big. Everybody liked superheroes. People are still watching that old black and white Superman TV show from before there was color TV. You know, people are still watching that. People are watching that, and people are showing it to their kids because they watched it when they were kids, and now they're older and they want to show it to their grandkids. You know, and people are still watching that. It's still something that people watch, right? It's not that popular, but people still watch it. And so I was thinking that that's maybe one of the reasons why he never became any bigger. But there were American comic book producers that made comics of his stuff. And I think it's because it was more of, it doesn't take a lot of people or a lot of money to make a comic book. It doesn't take like, we're going to make this big project thing to make a comic book, right? It takes like one artist, literally one artist. I mean, if you look at like how many people it takes to make a comic book usually, it really does take only one person to make an entire comic book. You don't need multiple people. The same person can write it, draw it, do everything, produce it, get it printed, promote it, everything. One person can make an entire like series of comics, and there are people that made a lot of comic books. But with both Michael Moorcock and his stories, it's just like like comic books they can make. Movies, however, movies are very, very high budget, and there's a lot of risk in movies, and it takes someone to recognize that this movie is going to be something popular. And the thing about like Moorcock's work, it's popular, but it's not like super popular. There are a lot of people who are into like fantasy books and whatever, who have read, Elric, and there's a lot of people who, there's a lot of authors who have read Elric. There are a lot of authors who have been inspired by Elric. A lot of fantasy authors are inspired by Elric. I mean, including George R. R. Martin, including a lot of that, and even like Neil Gaiman said that one of the reasons he became a writer is because he read the Elric saga, and it inspired him so much that he created some of his stuff, right? Like Sandman and all that stuff that Neil Gaiman did, who's also British. And they've made adaptations, they've made movies of his work and stuff like that. So I'm thinking the main reason they haven't done it is because he's not popular. But the thing is, a lot of people know who he is, and they've made so many comic books of it, and they've made so many like video games of other topics, of other characters and other stories that are just not popular. They've made video games literally out of like, and even British video games. They made a lot of video games from Monty Python's Flying Circus. They made video games of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? Which is like, it's popular kind of in Britain. Like, those things are popular in Britain. Moorcock is popular in Britain. When I was in London, I walked into the Waterstones, right, which is like their big bookshop, and I wanted to see, because I knew like that Moorcock was a British writer. I was like, they've got to have more of his work here, right? So I look at the shelf where Michael Moorcock, he's not in the fantasy section, he's in his own shelf. He's way recognized there. A lot of people know who he is, and he's one of the best writers there, and people, just because he's English, the English stores carry his work. Whereas like in America, you're going to see a few of his books in the fantasy section of the bookstore. In England, none of the books that were on the shelf by Michael Moorcock in Waterstones or any of the other stores that I've walked into were even fantasy related. They were stories I've never heard of before. That was like fiction. I didn't even know he was a fiction writer, right? But they're just fiction stories, and there was no Elric there whatsoever. So that might be another reason why it's just like, even Waterstone doesn't really carry Elric. And maybe also because it's like something he did a while ago that he's not really doing anymore, even though he's been doing it like lately and whatever. And anytime like Moorcock has been interviewed on any show, like whether it's YouTube or any interview show, people always bring up Elric because they want to talk about Elric, because they read Elric, they loved Elric, and they want to talk about Elric and stuff like that. And that's the thing about it, is that not only Elric was never like produced into like a video game, but none of his other work was produced into a video game or any kind of big time thing. And so, I mean, I would say that sometimes, some people would say, well, it might not make a good video game because Elric is too powerful. And that's true, but if you look at video games in general, a lot of the characters you play are like super powerful. You like, for example, Castlevania or something like that. You literally play as one of the most, like, the Prince of Evil, Prince of Darkness, basically, right? You play as this, like, immortal Prince of Darkness that has magic powers, swords, weapons, turned into mist, shoot flames, things like that. Like you'll get, like, super powerful. There's so many super powerful, like, characters in video games. Like Superman, right, is probably the most powerful character, not only superhero, but powerful character that's ever been written about in the history of powerful characters. And there are Superman games, right? And you can get killed in a Superman game. You can get knocked down and all of your power, and not just by kryptonite, but just by enemies that just can knock you down, that are just super powerful. And that's the thing about it, is like, yes, Elric is super powerful and his sword is super powerful, even overkill. But the thing is that, like, his enemies are also that much more powerful. So if you look at, like, any of the stories of Elric, he's got, like, he doesn't have the only powerful demon sword, right? He's got, like, his brother, his cousin, Yurkun, which was like the usurper, took his throne, abducted the love of his life, tried to kill him multiple times. He basically took the other sword, which was like Stormbringer, which was Mournblade, and they had a fight between Stormbringer and Mournblade. And I really do think that not only do, like, fans of those stories want to fight with Stormbringer and Mournblade, but I think even people that don't know anything about the stories will really enjoy a great story like that, and some great action scenes. And they're not just action scenes, they look cool, they're well designed. There's swords, there's sorcery, there's magic, there's gods and demigods and creatures and sorcerers and all kinds of things. There's also travel. There's an entire world where you don't just travel between one part of a world and another part. You travel between planes of existence, like multiverses, dimensions. You find things that are, like, completely different and foreign. Like in one of the stories in Sailor on the Seas of Fate, Elric finds his other aspects of himself, basically. Other people that, some of them actually met him in a different timeline that he doesn't recognize, but they know him because they already met each other in a different timeline. It's just not the timeline that Elric has seen yet. And they were on the ship going somewhere, and they kind of all met each other and had this whole experience with each other. And on top of that, you'd say, well, who was going to, like, draw this, and who's going to make the art for Elric, the video game? And the person that makes, there are a few people, there are people out there who are eager, who, like, their dream in life is to make, maybe not in life, but there are people out there that their dream is to make, like, Elric art, and basically the person you would go to, one of the people you'd go to make the art of Elric, would have to be Michael Whelan, who's a way popular artist, and also there's a few other guys who have been doing Elric art. This is another one who published kind of a reprinting of some of the older works and some other works. It was 10 years ago or something like that, 20 years ago, whatever it is. They re-released a lot of his older work, but they made it in these different books and whatever it was. I didn't really get into them. I have the books and I read some of it, but I didn't really get into it too much. And there was this guy who made these new art pieces of Elric, and he made all the covers for it and stuff. There's a lot of people who are drawn Elric. And so the artist, it wouldn't be so hard to do. And where like a movie would take, like the confidence of a huge Broadway, like Hollywood movie studio and whatever, and it would be super expensive. With a video game, it's not as expensive. It's a lot lower budget to make a video game than it is to make a movie. There are like studios already out there who are like, they don't know what video game to make. Like Rockstar doesn't know what video game to make. They made Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare. Okay, like Rockstar's Red Dead Redemption was great. I haven't played the second one yet, and they have a lot of other good stuff like Grand Theft Auto and whatever it was. A lot of people are into that one. But they made this other one called Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare, which is a weird thing that they did with Red Dead Redemption. Red Dead Redemption was it was like a Wild West video game. Open world, great characters, great story. The action was fantastic. You ride horses, you shoot guns. There's bad guys, there's good guys, there's all kinds of weird, people in it and whatever. And then like they kill off the character at the end of the story, but then his son kind of takes over and continues the story, whatever. But what they do is that they kill the character at the end of the story, and it's really a shame because I really wanted to play as the same character in the next video game. But then they had like Undead Nightmare that came out, and it was weird because then you just plug the game in, and there you are again in that same world of Red Dead Redemption with the same guy that was killed off, and now he's alive, and his family's alive, and everyone else is exactly the same how you left it, right? They didn't like destroy it. And and then you watch the cutscenes and everything's really cool, and then all of a sudden, it's like in these cutscenes, it was like all of a sudden it's like, well, we're gonna take this entire story that was a Wild West story, and we're just gonna put zombies in every single town, every single level. We're just gonna have zombies come after you, and instead of like having this amazing story with bad guys and good guys and gunslingers and all that kind of stuff, and sheriffs and whatever. No, it's just you fighting zombies in a Wild West setting. And every single town is just zombies and zombies and zombies. And I'm like, couldn't you just make like Red Dead Redemption 2 or like a sequel to the original one? Why did you have to turn into zombies? In my opinion, it gets old fast with the zombies. It was like at first it's like whatever, but then it's just the same level over and over again. And it's just, you just clear one town and another and another and another. That's all you do. And it kind of got boring fast, Instead of them making another like sequel to it with another story and continue it somehow or do something with it, right? And that's the thing about it. A lot of these studios don't really know what to do. So they're making another sequel to another popular franchise that they did before, and there's this like lot of stories. There's this like stories and stories and stories and worlds and characters and different like weapons and armor and magic and creatures and gods and whatever. Everything is in these stories. It's already there. It's ready to be turned into a bit. Like it's gonna take no design. The only design that people are gonna have to do is take the story and change it into a playable game, And that's the thing about it, is that like people think, some people might say, well, okay, but you've got this overkill sword and you're this overkill character, right? And you're like, you've got this magic and you're emperor of this like empire, and you've got the sword and you've got this like patron deity who's like super powerful and always there to help you no matter whenever you ask him for help, usually. And no enemy can withstand that. It's just there's no enemy that can withstand it. But the thing is, like in the books, the enemies were like super popular, super powerful. They were like they were monsters and they were gods and they had armies at their disposal. They had like creatures, and there was just so much. It's such a cool thing to just like like explore the land and go from place to place. And one thing they could do is there was a scene where these ships were invading Melnibone, and the Melnibone ships had to fight them. And having a ship battle would be cool, right? Just the scenes, the cutscenes, the story. You can just do so much with it. And you don't have to. You can have you can have creatures that like don't have a soul, right? Like golems or whatever it is, or mechanical, or it's just creatures that are not affected by Stormbringer. And then what do you do, right? Because if there's like a creature without a soul, can't be killed by a soul-sucking sword, right? And the thing is that they've made video games that were similar, that were inspired by Elric of Melnibone. Um, they've made games like Soul Reaver, which was very interesting. When I first saw Soul Reaver, that came out originally on the Dreamcast, as far as I could tell. The first time I saw it was on the Dreamcast. And it was pretty cool. Like, you basically have a soul-eating sword, and that was the whole thing about it. The rest of it was different, but you had a soul-eating sword. And when you think Soul Reaver, you think Stormbringer, because you think of that kind of sword. And on top of that, you had The Witcher, which is like a lot of people have called out The Witcher as a ripoff of Elric. As a lot of people have said he's a ripoff of Elric, mostly because he looks like Elric. He's got kind of the same, similar looking hair. Like, his eyes aren't red, but they're like different color. His hair's not white, but it's kind of like a light gray or whatever it was. But anyway, like, a lot of people said, yeah, he's a ripoff of Elric and stuff like that. And that became super popular, right? You had the series, you had a bunch of games. You had Witcher 2, Assassins of Kings. You had Witcher 3, The Wild Hunt. I don't know if there's going to be a Witcher 4. Probably there's going to be a Witcher 4. You know what I mean? And so it's so cool to do that. And it wouldn't be the same as making a movie out of it. Wouldn't be the same, because you wouldn't need millions and millions of dollars in a budget. Because with a movie, like, look, the budget of a movie is huge. First, you need actors you have to pay. Then you need extras that you have to pay. Then you have to have like a bunch of like technical people, camera people that you have to pay. Like, then you have to have like on location sets and costumes and all kinds of stuff. You need like a year or something to make the movie, and then you have to make the movie sort of like in these fantasy settings, right? Which you could do a lot now with like computer generated special effects and stuff like that. But but with a video game, it's just like you can pretty much get Moorcock to work directly with it to say, I think it will look good like this, or I think it will work like that, And you can get a lot of the people that have already been doing like the covers for the novels and the art for the comic books to do the artwork and stuff like that. It'd just be a lot cheaper. It'd be a lot cooler, and I would actually much rather play an Elric video game than watch an Elric movie. I'd love to see an Elric movie, or any of the fantasy movies by Michael Moorcock. It doesn't even have to be Elric. Elric, I would say, mainly because that's his most popular character. Everyone knows that. Even people that don't know any of his other work know Elric, because that's kind of his most he's known for that, more or less, more than anything else. And so, like, so making an Elric video game would be cool. And they've been making, like, there's a lot of other creators who they could have been making a video game about it, but they never actually did. Because, like, if you look at something like Harry Potter, like, yeah, I mean, there are great Harry Potter video games. There's a lot. There's also some not so good Harry Potter video games, right? There's been video games about pretty much everything because it's easy to make. There's been comic books about everything because it's easy to make, and you don't have to take, the thing about it is that, like, with Elric, you could see that becoming a very good, successful video game, because the elements in Elric have already been used in other video games that were successful. Sword and sorcery video games are successful. A lot of the best video games that are considered the best video games are sword and sorcery video games. In a world where the story's already kind of like made, the story already exists, the characters exist, the world exists, And so it wouldn't be like, you wouldn't have to like think up stuff. If you can think up new stuff and put that in the game, that would be cool. Because with a Elric video game, you kind of want to make everyone happy. There's people that want the video game or the movie or whatever, but the video game to be like exactly like the story. You want to go through that, sort of like the James Bond, um, where they did like a lot of the scenes from the movies and they put that in the James Bond. It works really, really well with a video game because you're actually playing through. You're not like watching a movie that you already read in a book, right? You're actually playing in the story, right? So that would be awesome that you actually get to wield Stormbringer and fight your Coon with Mournblade. That you could summon Ariok, that you could like cast spells, that you could frickin' be the sailor on the seas of fate and do all of the things that were in the books, right? And actually play through that and have that experience like for yourself, right? In addition, you can make other levels and scenes and stuff just by additional stuff. Michael Moorcock is one of the most creative writers of our time, and I'm sure he can make up some other stuff. And that kind of like video game has already been super popular. That sword and sorcery genre video game. Whereas like in movies, like the sword and sorcery genre has kind of a lot of the time been hit or miss. They've made great movies with sword and sorcery that became super popular, and they've made really bad movies with sword and sorcery that it's got a cult following, or maybe it's so good so bad it's good, or whatever, or maybe it's just a bad movie. You know what I mean? So that they're like with sword and sorcery, that genre, they're like, well, it could be good. It could be Game of Thrones. It could be, Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. It could be Star Wars, right? But it also could be Barbarian Queen or something, It could be like some really, really bad, campy B movie that no one's going to want to watch. It could be Conan the Destroyer or something like that, right? It could be something like that no one cares about. Nobody, like they made Terminator, and they made a couple of good Terminator movies, and then they started making more and more and more. No, it's got to be, we're going to just continue it like The Matrix, whatever. We're just going to make more Matrixes, right? And we're going to make another Blade Runner. It's going to be just as good as the first Blade Runner, even though we're going to cast the main character, the main character that was in the first Blade Runner into a secondary role instead of making them prime, the central role character or whatever it was. Because like that kind of story has been successful a lot. If you have a good video game studio working on it with good writers and artists and a good budget and good like game coders and stuff like that, chances are that, and they make a good game out of it. It's not necessarily hit or miss with making a good game. If you work on a great game, you'll make a good game. And some developers have been making consistently good games, but they just have to know what they're doing. And with the right, I think, direction, especially if you use Michael Moorcock and a lot of the artists, at least the people that are going to play that game or originally like want to play that game are the people that already like Elric. So there's enough of a following with that kind of video game that you don't need like millions of people to go see the movie in order for it to be successful. You just need like people to, it needs to be a good game. And it's not hit or miss as to like whether you make a good game. It's, do you have quality people working on it? Are you a quality studio? Do you have a good budget? Are you taking long enough to do this game? And do you have the right art direction, story direction? Are you making good decisions about designing this game? Because the story's already there. The characters are already there, but that's the thing. It's, the way I see it is, if you put it with a good studio, with a good budget, with good people behind it who care about it, who care about the game, and there are a lot of people that already do care about this story, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people who are developing games that actually want to make this game, because they've been making other games for so long that have been taking this and that and the other thing from Elric. The soul-sucking sword in Soul Reaver, the hair and you know the sort of that kind of character in The Witcher, for example. If you think that The Witcher is a you know a copy of Elric, there's just so many little things that they've been taking from Elric, and they've been changing the name of it and making it something totally different, you know. And so why not just make Elric? You know, why not just make the Eternal Champion? And even if they're like, well, we can't do Elric because he's albino, no one's going to get behind that. He's not just albino. He's an albino Melnibonean. He's a cool looking albino. He's not like just an albino. He's a cool looking one. He's tall, he's slim, he's got like dragon features, you know, he's got white hair, red eyes. He's an emperor, so he's dressed well, even though with chaotic clothing and like dragon helm, and it's just a cool looking thing. It's you've got the artist to do it and stuff like that, you know. And that's the thing, is that like they've been making like video games about this, that, and the other thing. They've been making fantasy video games about new stories that they've like brought, you know, that they thought up. There's a lot of like fantasy video games that are about this, that. There's about Knight Templars, and there's Dragonborns, and there's all kinds of like different, you know, like video games about that kind of thing. And they've been making these pretty well, you know, not all the time, but they've been making it pretty well a lot of the time if they believe in it. And there's a lot of studios who already have that experience of making a sword and sorcery video game. And I think it will be perfect because it's something where there's no end to the amount of like reiterations you can do with it. There's no end to like, you can use this part of the story or that part of the story. There's just so much you can do with it that why haven't they made one already, right? And I don't even know that they're like in the process of making any. They've been making Elric stuff and calling it something else. Why not make an Elric thing and call it Elric? Or call it like any of the other characters, or just create a new character that's sort of an eternal champion, or like have Michael Moorcock work on a video game, you know? Like he's been doing comic books, he's been doing music, so why not a video game? He even tried doing a movie, you know, that no one's heard of. You know, I've never heard of it before, and until recently, like, what? He made a movie? No. But yeah, but apparently he did. It's just not very good, and I have no intention of watching it. And I don't consider it like an Elric movie or anything that I really want from him. That's not the movie I want, you know? So yeah. So that's the thing about it, is that like it's perfect, it's ready to be made, and it has a following already, right? It has a lot of people who are into fantasy are into video games. And most video games right now are fantasy based. Not every video game is fantasy. There's a lot of like, you know, the sports games, and there's all kinds of like fighting games, and there's like flying games and whatever, you know, army games or whatever. But a lot of people are into video games or into like fantasy, because fantasy and video games, they go together. If you look at like a video game convention and whatever, a lot of the characters are like fantasy characters. You know, there's a lot of The Witcher, for example, huge fantasy character in video games. And so yeah, so that's the thing about it, is that like it's already going to get people who want to watch to play it. You know, with a movie, maybe like not everyone that goes see movies is a fan of like Elric and Michael Moorcock's work. But the thing is that like people that are into like the fantasy genre, a lot of them have heard of Elric and have heard of some of his work and read some of his work, or even if they read the comic or whatever it is. They already have the fan base. So they already have like a certain amount of people that are gonna go and play that game, no matter, even if it's not a great game, people are still gonna play it because they're already fans of it. So it's got the fan base. Maybe not enough fans to make a movie or whatever, maybe enough fans to make a movie. I think there should be enough fans to make a movie, and I think if the movie's good, you're gonna create fans, you know. But you know, that's the thing. There's a chance of it becoming popular, which is like some people would want that, some people wouldn't want that. But that's the thing about a video game, is that it's lower budget, it's faster to make, it's fewer people, it's less effort, and it's something that I personally would like a lot more than like another comic book or a movie, whatever. I would just be like, that would be awesome to play as Elric, or play as some of these Eternal Champion characters, would probably be better, than to just watch a movie that you already read the book. Yeah, it'd be cool. I'd be want to see it in the movie, whatever, or maybe the movies will be different than the book, whatever it is, right? But that's the thing is like playing it, it could be just like the book, it could be different than the book. Just playing as Elric in that kind of world, I think that would be awesome. And I think it's just ready to make a game out of it, but why don't they do it, right? So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a like and a subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And I will see you guys in another video. Take care. Later. Great day.